Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. And then, yeah, folks can totally join as late as they need to, especially if there are some issues with the link. So Devin and I are actually here together. And what we'll do is definitely feel video off. You can interrupt us with questions too, if you have any. So since we're sharing the same screen, we'll both try to watch the video, or sorry, watch the chat. And then I'll probably turn off my video as after I'm done, but we can start off with introductions. So I can go first and then I'll pass it off to Devin and then we'll turn off the video from here just so we don't have to pass the computer screen back and forth. So if folks don't know me, so my name is Ella Aho, and I am the Director of Career Services, and I use she and her pronouns.
Hi, everyone. My name is Devin Darland. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Assistant Director of Employer Engagement and Internships. And just before we jump into our presentation today, we did want to take a moment to acknowledge how tough and emotional the past couple of days have been as we've been watching things unfold in Ukraine. And so we did want to take some time to acknowledge it and say that it's totally fine. If you've been having, a tough couple of days, feel free to show up how you are, show up and engage at the level that you feel capable of. This is a really important topic for us to talk about, and we're excited to do that, but we did want to just acknowledge that it's also a really heavy day today.
Thank you, Devin. Okay, I'm going to turn off my video, but we'll just so I can see. Okay. So for our presentation today, we are talking about student employment as an HSI initiative or Hispanic Serving Initiative. And for context, we also, Devin and I serve on the employer engagement on the student employment collaborative work team. And this is a new collaborative work team that started January 2022. So we just started about a month ago and we had a really fast timeline. So we started in January and then our report is due actually next week. And so we wanted to go over context to how the Student Employment Collaborative Work Team came about, who's on the collaborative work team. We're also going to go through each of the charge and then also not only how student employment, how it serves as an HSI initiative, but the barriers that we talked about regarding student employment, and then also some of the recommendations that we are going to put forward as a committee. And then we also have an activity as well. So since you all are on your computer towards the end of the presentation, if folks want to participate, we'll ask you a few questions through like a survey. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so for context for the Student Employment Collaborative Work Team, many of you probably have already experienced this, but I would say Salt Lake Community College isn't immune to this. The word student employment or what student employment means can be very confusing. So for example, it can be hard to know who owns the process over work study. What does an internship mean? What does student employment mean? We have 2 job boards for students. So what is the process, right? It was very clear that just our general process for students and also for supervisors regarding student employment was not clear and was messy. And we also know that student employment is a huge retention tool, and it also is something that we want to create greater access for. So the Student Employment Collaborative Team came about to make sure that we could rethink our process and how we're serving students, and then also make it clear for our faculty and staff who work at Salt Lake Community College, because those people are our main supervisors for our students. And how we ended up picking the folks who are on the team is that we thought through everyone who oversees some part of student employment. So Devin and I are serving on the team and we both represent career services. And then we also are working closely with folks who are in people and workplace culture and HR. So the PARS process is ran through HR as well as a large portion of on-campus employment. And then work study is another large part of on-campus employment, and that process is ran through financial aid and enrollment. And then in addition, we also have a CTE department and workforce training and education. So thinking about employment as far as apprenticeship goes or training in the workplace was another population that we wanted to make sure that we had voices from. And then we also have folks who work directly with students, and then also with students who are asylum seeking or international students or students who have DACA or students without work authorization. We know that our process in general dictates who can apply for either scholarships or financial aid or on-campus employment. And since we are an emerging Hispanic-serving institution, right now, the way our processes are for on-campus employment, we are missing a large population of students who could have an opportunity on campus or who are denied access. And so we had a really deep conversation, either thinking through how can we provide more access or provide more education for our cabinet members and possibly Capitol Hill to make sure that we really are accessible to all students. So, and then if you all have questions, feel free to interrupt or comments or type in the chat as well. I'll try to watch that too. So before we get started talking about the charge, we did want to just clarify what we feel on-campus employment means. And we know that the term on-campus employment can be confusing. So how we identify on-campus employment is, one, we worked with the HR department on campus and we got their definition of on-campus employment. And then we also worked with our career services organization, which is called the National Association of Colleges and Employers, or NACE. And so on-campus employment basically means that it is a student opportunity where a student is either a full-time student or a part-time student, and then they work on campus and are able to be paid for the work that they are doing. There are different job opportunities for students to be considered on campus. So it can be an internship, it can be a lab aide, it could be in administrative offices, it can be in facilities. So the objective is just that the student works on campus on a department and then also is a student too. And then there, of course, there are regulations where students are not able to work more than 125 hours per month to make sure that they're still successful since they are students first. And then the other thing too is that sometimes during like holiday break, students are able to work more hours. And then I think a big confusion regarding on-campus employment is who owns what part of the process. So for Salt Lake Community College, financial aid oversees work study, which is an on-campus employment opportunity. HR oversees our on-campus student employment, in particular the PARS process. And then career services oversees the campus internship program and as well as the cooperative education program. And then we do know that there are more internship opportunities that are outside of our office. And so we actually are going to, in our next slide, talk about the differences between what an internship is and what a job is. And so I'll let Devin take it from here.
All right, so it was really important in our CWT to distinguish the difference between jobs and internships. I think those terms are used in a lot of different ways in a lot of different spaces, and there wasn't always clarity on what the distinction really is. So the following criteria that we've got here on this slide to define an internship are provided by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, or NACE, and it's also the definition that we use within our career services office. So internships, as opposed to jobs, are intended to be an extension of the classroom. And so unlike a job, internships must have clearly defined learning objectives, learning outcomes, or goals. And they must also align with a student's academic program, their career goals, or provide transferable skills to the student. Internships are also intended to be time-bound. So unlike a job that can continue on for a period of time, internships specifically have a beginning and end period. And there needs to be a dedicated supervisor who can ensure that those learning objectives are being met and that supervisor is providing support and resources to that student. While our office oversees the campus internship program, we did also want to note that there are many other on-campus departments that do hire and pay for interns on their own outside of our department.
Okay, so before we jump into a lot of the work that we've been doing as a collaborative work team, we did want to start off by introducing why student employment matters. So for those of you who are familiar with HIPS or high impact practices, internships in particular count as a high impact practice. And what that means is that it's an opportunity that students partake in during their college time, and the other opportunities could be either study abroad or also living on campus. And so these are practices that help students retain and be successful and also have a sense of belonging at their institution. So that's one reason why internships are great. The other thing too, we talked about with retention and success, but we know that based off historical data, the number one reason of why students might not stay in school is due to financial reasons. And so making sure that we have really competitive opportunities for our students is important. Also making sure that the opportunities we have are clear and that they're accessible to all students. And then providing different types of opportunities where students can use their skills and strengths and then use that either towards graduation, transferring, or to a certificate or going into the workforce. The other positive of why student employment matters is that it's important to encourage students to use their cultural and capital wealth in a professional setting. So while we know that there are a lot of important aspects to student employment, our collaborative work team also talked about the barriers to student employment and why the barriers matter. So in particular, the things that we talked about is that there are a lot of government and federal regulations, in particular to either students who are undocumented, who do not have work authorization, asylum-seeking students, and also international students. And so some of those federal and regulations are the particular funding pots in which students can use for employment, whether a student can be paid or not, whether a student has to have work authorization or Social Security to be an on-campus student, whether we can use words like stipend or volunteer. So there are a lot of regulations that prohibit students from applying to on-campus opportunities. So when thinking about retention and success and becoming an emerging Hispanic institution, we have a lot of barriers that do not allow the population that we're serving to be paid for the work that we know that they want to do. And some of it could be funding sources too. So right now, a lot of departments are paid from different funding sources. Some come from directly from the state, but there are some private funding that we receive that would be able to serve international students and also students who are asylum seeking or undocumented students. But the issue goes back to our policies regarding HR and applying for jobs is that there's still a barrier. Even if we have the money and if it is accessible, we haven't figured out a way to where students can actually apply or be considered some type of volunteer to still get funding for their opportunities to be able to stay in school. And then right now, as far as where we don't have any postings that are in Spanish. And actually in our last session that we had that was in person, we had a really good point of it's not enough to just have postings be in Spanish. And one, Spanish can mean there are different types of Spanish that are spoken depending on what country you're from and also different dialects of Spanish. So not everyone speaks the same type of Spanish, but two, we also need to make sure that we have marketing in Spanish and then also the opportunity for interviews to be in Spanish too. And I know part of the work that the Hispanic-Serving Institution collaborative work team is doing is that making sure that we're paying people who are doing this work. So we're not just finding people in departments and putting a lot of work on them, but having intentionality or a department who can do this work so that it's being done right. And then lastly, I know that, so Kino, who's here, and a lot of the students who spoke today in the plenary talked about how they felt like their experiences weren't being valued, or they didn't know that the skill sets that they had would be something that they could use in a professional setting or talk about, or they might not know how to even find opportunities or flexible opportunities. So right now it's really unclear of how we are valuing students, how we're telling them that, you know, they matter and their skill sets matter, but also just finding access to find a job and knowing about the information is really confusing for students and for staff. So Cabinet decided on 3 charges that were prominent for this collaborative work team. So the first charge is, sorry, I'm just moving my bar, conduct a review of on-campus employment And then the second charge is recommend ways to expand on-campus employment in the campus internship program. So we decided to combine these two because a lot of the barriers and recommendations were similar. And during our first meeting that we had as a collaborative work team, we connected with staff who work with students, and a lot of students are already having these conversations of on-campus employment, either with our faculty in the classroom or with other staff in the departments that they work in. And one student just asked a really great question of why don't you apply for on-campus roles? So we started to rethink the lens and just ask why aren't either supervisors hiring on-campus opportunities and or why aren't students applying for on-campus roles? And so some of the barriers or the gaps that we found is just in general, the process for on-campus opportunities is very confusing for students and for supervisors who are our faculty and staff. I know, for example, from working career services, we oftentimes get questions regarding, the work study process or PARS. And so we don't do a great job of showing a system of like who you should go to for what process. The other thing that can be difficult too is the turnover in departments. So while it's great to have new staff because they can find gaps that you might not have known before, I think you can also lose knowledge at the same time. And then according to recent data regarding pay in Salt Lake County, the average pay is about $15 an hour. And right now, what we offer to on-campus student employment is the starting pay of $12 an hour. And so we're not competitive for on-campus opportunities. So even though we know that internships are a high impact practice, or even though we know that on-campus employment is important for retention and success, if we don't pay competitive salaries, that point of marketing isn't going to matter to students. And then we talked a little bit about this too, but access to student employment. So not only just the knowledge of how to apply, but also making sure that we truly are being accessible. So we talked about some of the barriers of funding and as well as the actual process of applying for an on-campus employment. And then some of our requirements, as we heard today in the plenary, are not helpful for students. So there could be requirements regarding GPA, having like a double tuition waiver and applying for an on-campus opportunity, and work study. Not everyone can qualify or knows the process for work study. And then one thing that we talked about too is just lack of resources as far as marketing goes. So we do have an institutional marketing team who does great work, and there's so much to be either worked on regarding letting students know about on-campus opportunity that we really need someone who's dedicated. Just right now, it's super confusing to know where to go to, what department to go to, who people should talk to. And so that is a huge barrier right now. It's just lack of marketing.
All right, so in our CWT, we thought intentionally about student employment broadly, as well as within the context of becoming an HSI and what that means specifically for our final recommendations in our report. And so some of the recommendations that we've developed based upon our research that we did for charges 1 and 2 specifically are the following on this slide. So we recommend one, clarifying the process for on-campus employment for both students and supervisors. Additionally, we recommend raising the minimum pay for students to $15 an hour as a starting point, and then paying more for students who have additional skills, such as being bilingual. We also thought through ways to engage more Spanish-speaking students and promote on-campus employment intentionally to Hispanic and Latinx students. And some of those ways include posting job or internship descriptions in both Spanish and English, and highlighting within postings that being a bilingual applicant, being international, et cetera, are specifically, you're encouraged to apply. And then within our job board platform that we use called Handshake, we can also create specific labels that students can utilize to search for and apply for positions more easily. So an example might be creating a bilingual label in Handshake. And that's not to suggest that all Hispanic or Latinx students are Spanish speaking, but rather to acknowledge that that is one step on the path to increasing accessibility and inclusion in these opportunities. And then lastly, we just want to help students better understand whether or not they are qualified for certain types of on-campus employment, such as work study, for example. We found that oftentimes students just assume that they're not qualified or that they don't have work study when maybe they do. And so making that a little bit more clear and the requirements of a position more clear within the job and internship postings.
Yes. Okay. All right. So our last charge that was identified by SALT Cabinet is review current work study processes and recommend ways to improve the use of funds to increase student completion. And so using the same word or the same question of why don't either students apply for work study and or why don't supervisors hire work study students? So what we found out is that the process in general is really confusing. It's confusing to know at what point are we at Salt Lake Community College making it harder on students and staff, and at what point are regulations through financial aid. So making it really clear, marketing that the process is helpful, but right now it's just super confusing. If there are already other opportunities on campus, like campus internship program or other on-campus non-internship programs, if those processes are easier, then it makes sense of why supervisors right now aren't applying for a work study student. And then, as Devin says, students might not know that they have work study, what work study is, or what it even means. So I know that for me in particular, I had work study in college, and even though I applied for financial aid and was told to check the box for work study, I still didn't know what that meant in particular. So doing a better job of truly explaining that. And then lack of institutional buy-in. So in the previous example of, if you're a supervisor and there are easier ways to find a student to work on campus, you're not going to go hard to try to figure out the process for work study. So we really need to do a better job of creating some institutional buy-in. And then confusion of funding process. So right now, how work study works is that a student might have a varied amount depending on the semester, and their work study funds might not make it all the way through the end of the semester. And so I think there's confusion of, well, what happens if a student work study is done and then a department doesn't have money to help that student? So we don't have a process right now to supplement that. And then in addition, a work study is not an opportunity in the summertime at all. It's only a fall and spring opportunity. And so what happens if a department has a student who they really like, but they don't have the funds to support them in the summertime? So there might be barriers like these or lack of knowledge that prohibit a department from getting a work study student. And then in additional low pay too. So based on our data, the starting wage and the only wage that work study students are paid is $12 an hour. And if there are other on-campus opportunities that pay more, then even if a student has work study, they're going to apply for those other opportunities because they want the salary that has the highest wage. And also if departments are asking for, or have a higher wage and are offering a higher wage, then that also means that they're beating out the work study opportunities. So there definitely is competition within our own institution. And then recommendations. So some of these are what we're already doing. But right now, everything that involves work study is paper-based. And so we're working on having work study documents be online and also fillable PDFs. Simplifying the process too. So I know in the collaborative work team document, we have a process map to really go over the process of work study for a student. So what happens as soon as they apply for financial aid, to how are they notified that they have work study, and then how are they notified to find opportunities. So simplifying that process, but also making sure that we're marketing that process to students, faculty, and staff. So if we do end up getting a student in our office who's confused about the work study process, we at least know how to help simplify that option for them. And then marketing the benefits of work study. So this is not only to students, but also to faculty and staff of why you should hire a work study student. And then increasing the pay to $15 an hour so that we can be equitable with the other on-campus opportunities, as well as being equitable and competitive with the Salt Lake County opportunities. And then we added a fourth charge so that we could make sure that our processes were aligning with becoming a Hispanic-serving institution. But our fourth charge is looking at our on-campus employment and processes and analyzing them to make sure that they are equitable. So a lot of what we're talking about as far as funding goes is that making sure that we are supporting students and departments with additional funds so that they can pay students, and are figuring out another option if students don't qualify for financial aid or for on-campus opportunities. Then what are the other options in which we can do to best support them?
So in summary, our collaborative work team has identified a number of recommendations that we've outlined in our report, but these here are some of our sort of larger categories that we identified. So the need to offer higher pay, as Ella was just mentioning, for on-campus employment, intentionally recruiting and hiring bilingual candidates, improving the way in which we're posting and marketing on-campus positions, particularly to increase inclusion for Hispanic and Latinx students, clarifying the processes and simplifying these processes for both students and supervisors, and really providing support and resources to supervisors, because this goes so far beyond just the sort of recruitment and posting process. But even in our previous in-person breakout session, we had a really great conversation with folks about the need to provide resources for supervisors through the interview process, and making sure that the experience that students have once they're hired into an on-campus position are going to be welcoming, inclusive, and equitable opportunities for students. So the need for those types of resources is really there. And then we also found that in order for us to meet those needs, it's really going to take institutional buy-in and support across all departments. And that it's not just the departments represented on the CWT that need to be involved in this, but that it's really something that we all need to be invested in and provide support towards.
Okay, so next we have an activity if folks would like to participate. So you either can participate in the activity anonymously, or we can also ask this in questions and people can participate through the chat. So if folks would go to slido.com, it's SLIDO and then .com, and then it should ask for you to type in a code, and then that code is going to be 386894. And again, that code is 386894. And I'm going to stop sharing really quickly so that I can pull it up. And then before we end our session, we definitely want to gather input from you all to see if there are recommendations that we missed. And so we definitely want to hear from you all too. Okay, so it looks like folks have already entered it in, so I will share again. Okay, so for our first Slido that we have, so again, it's Slido, SLIDO, and then .com, and then the number is, or the code is 386894. But if you don't want to participate in this, that's fine too. So the question that we're asking is the process for hiring a CIP position clear? And so we have yes, kind of, no, and then the last one is what is CIP? And so we'll give folks a couple of minutes. Okay, so far we have 57% who say yes, 29% say kind of, and 14% say what is CIP? All right, and then our next question is the process for hiring a work-study position clear? And the choices are yes, no, kind of, and I think what is CIP? Or sorry, what is work study? Oh, wow, so far, okay, we have more. I see we almost have a tie. Okay, so far we have 60% who say no. Ooh, now it's a tie, so I'll let you all keep going. Okay, so 43% who say no, 43% say kind of, and 14% who say yes. And then our last question before 25% now, yes. Our last question before we jump into possible gaps in our recommendations are, if you were helping a student, would you know how to help them find a bilingual preferred role? Yes, no, or kind of are the options. Okay, so far we have 50% who said no, and 25% who said yes, and 25% who said kind of. So the reason why we want to do this activity is because, we oversee a large portion of on-campus employment, and we both, and I would say probably everyone in our office genuinely know that the process is really confusing of whether it's CIP or whether it's on-campus employment through PARS or if it's work study. And then we also know that we keep talking about all these great things of how we can help students, like having a bilingual preferred role, but we haven't actually educated our team on like how to help students find those opportunities. So this lets us know that not only is there more work that we need to do, but we really need to be clear, and then we really need to do a better job of marketing. So that is it for our presentation. However, we do have 15 minutes more. So we're curious from you all. One, if you have questions about the things we talked about, and two, would love to hear gaps in our analyses or recommendations that we might not have thought of. And feel free to either write in the chat if you would like to, or interrupt too. Unmute, I mean. Thanks, Kano. All right, so some things in the chat is either awesome or looking forward to having more opportunities to hire students to work in our libraries. Yes, we support libraries, of course. And we won't be offended if there are gaps that you all thought of too. Okay, well, I know it's a Friday and I also am not going to make folks talk either. So hopefully that was enough time if folks did have things that they want to share. But if you're a processor like me, I always think of the answer like 2 days afterwards. So if there are recommendations or gaps, like definitely don't hesitate to email Devin and I, so I can just post there's actually a question. Is there a list of which departments participate in work study? Good question. So one thing that we didn't talk about that's confusing as part of the process is, so we have 2 job boards that we use. One is Handshake and one is PARS, and we want to advocate for both of them because PARS in particular is a really important part for hiring and gathering student data. So we're not looking to get rid of that part, but it is confusing, right? Do you apply on PARS and also Handshake? But to your question in particular, Brett, so any student who is a work study needs to look for a position on PARS. The financial aid process for posting any work study position is on PARS. So it is possible that in Handshake, a department might market an opportunity in Handshake, and then they might say apply externally, and that external part is going to go to PARS. And so I'm just typing in PARS here. PARS is the system that we use. And I think So you are right. So right now we know that the process is a little bit confusing because we are making students apply in Handshake in PARS. And so we are looking to get rid of that process and market a work study opportunity in Handshake so that there's more places to market these opportunities, but to make it clear that a student only has to apply in one place. So that was one of the recommendations.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Leslie, really what came through in our report is sort of marketing Handshake is the hub for all things career related, so that students can really easily know like Handshake is the place to go to find any type of opportunity. It's only one location to go to. And then we can on the back end set that up in Handshake so that they're technically applying through PARS, but they're finding opportunities in Handshake and only being required to apply once to a position. So hopefully that makes sense. But that'll just make it a lot more convenient for students to find opportunities and apply to them.
And then we have a question of, once you submit your report to leadership, what will the next steps look like? That's a great question. So our report, our draft report, I should say, is due next week. And so as a team, we're meeting together to go over our report and the recommendations. And then we present it in front of CPC. I'm blanking on like what they stand for, but it's a committee who goes over the recommendations for collaborative work teams, and then based off the feedback they will come back and say like options could be continue this work of a collaborative work team, just focus on like charge 3 of work study. So they're most likely going to come back with recommendations of what our team should do next. It was a really short timeline, so I'm hoping that there's more option for us to do more, because I know we did do surveys to students, but we didn't have a long enough time to do like a focus group with students and get more student perspective. So that would be one thing, is just the time limit didn't allow us to do that portion. But as soon as we hear of next steps, I'm sure a large thing will be marketing and educating to make sure that everyone has the same information. So we're going to work hard to make sure that all of the information is clear. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here and supporting us. Thank you for your questions and also for your recommendations. That's been super helpful for our team. And then just on like a one-on-one note, if there's more that we need to do from our department to either facilitate questions or train on parts in Handshake, we can also referral to our HR partners or connect with you all on those. So we're happy to continue to work with you all to make sure that this information is easy for everyone. So thank you all and enjoy your Friday.
Everyone. Bye.